Recently, I was chatting with another startup founder and telling him the story about how we 10x'd our activation rate in Hoop with our self-serve sign-up flow. It was such a great story, I thought it would be awesome to share it. So I sat down with my co-founder Justin, who is the Chief Product Officer of Hoop, and we get into the tactical things that we did, the strategic things, and hopefully it's helpful for you. Hi everyone, my name is Stella Garber and I am co-founder of Hoop, a new AI task manager that automatically captures tasks across Slack, email, and meetings. And I'm here with my co-founder Justin. Hey Justin.
Hello.
And we're doing a series about building in public, and we had what I thought was a really interesting sort of story to tell around how we more than tripled our activation in Hoop. Would you say that's an accurate assessment?
I was just looking at this. If you go from our absolute worst, we measure this on weekly cohorts. If you go to our absolute worst weekly cohort, which was back in September, which we can talk more about why then, to our absolute best, it's almost a 10x improvement.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
part of that is due to the fact that it was so bad to start that it was possible, but it was a really big and really meaningful improvement. So
I was going to say that is an even better headline, how we 10x'd our activation rate, actually, not just BS, but looking at data. Yeah. So why don't we start at the very beginning?
Okay.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how do people get activated, or what does activation even mean for our product? What is our product? All that good stuff.
Now, like how we currently do it?
Well, maybe you can start.
Why don't I start where we are today, and then
great.
we can talk about how we got here, because we definitely didn't start in this spot. We measure activation of every user. A user is either activated or not activated. We have found that there's a connection, a correlation, and somewhat of a causation between users activating and users ending up subscribing. In cohorts where more users activate, we also see more users subscribe. It's not a prerequisite. You don't have to activate to subscribe, but it tends to be that the more people in a given cohort that activate end up subscribing. So we measure that. Our definition of activation, which is kind of specific to our product, is a user is activated if they get assigned tasks from 2 or more sources. For us, sources are meetings, email, and Slack. Tasks from 2 or more sources in their first 8 hours using the product.
So just to pause right there, the way that people find out about Hoop, let's say they hear about it from someone or they see an ad, they come on to Hoop. They don't need to talk to a salesperson or get a demo. They can just basically sign up with their Google Workspace email and then connect their Slack account, potentially use Hoop in a meeting. And the idea is that instead of writing things down, taking notes, Hoop is going to capture everything for you and put it in one spot. So if we were going to break down that activation metric, you said that users had to get tasks. So that's something where they're saying, hey, Justin, I need you to do XYZ, or can you take a look at XYZ for me?
Or it could even be in a meeting, I might say, I will do X, Y, and Z, before our next call or something like that.
So tasks that are relevant to the person, not just general tasks. From 2 or more sources. So let's talk about what those sources are. Yeah,
so meetings, Zoom calls, Google Meet, etc. Slack, so any channel, DM, whatever, or email, any message you get that has something for you to do in it.
So again, it was tasks from 2 or more sources, and then there was a time frame, right?
Yes, and the time frame is critical, within their first 8 hours after signing up for the product.
Okay. Awesome. So that's a pretty strict definition, or a pretty explicit, precise definition, whatever you want to say. How did you come up with that, or how did we come up with that?
Well, I did a lot of the background work, but it was certainly a team effort. We had a bunch of discussions. Actually, it was kind of cool. We had, if you remember, it's a few months back, we had done this. I had created a bunch of Figma slides decks. This was Figma slides that just come out, and I created some to kind of talk through my thinking and my analysis with the team. It's nice to have those as artifacts. I just went quickly back and looked through some of them. So maybe it's worth stepping way back and talking about how we even got to self-serve. So we came up with the idea for Hoop several months ago. We immediately got to building with the goal of building something that was useful as quickly as possible, with the idea of getting that in front of some real potential customers ASAP. There's some complexity what we built, so it probably took us, let's say, several weeks to get the first version up and running and something that we could give to an external customer. We had a wait list and we did some outbound there. We got people interested through paid ads, right? We were starting that right from the beginning, right? Pretty low budget, low scale.
Yeah, and that's like a whole other conversation. I think part of the thing that we did with paid ads at that point was trying to figure out what the right messaging was for this new product idea that we had. So it wasn't just about like sourcing new people, but yeah, that's a whole other thing.
But that's totally true. Yeah, that's a whole nother content. We should do that sometime. But part of that was also, though, we wanted to get people like not friends, family, investors. Like these are random people out there, never heard of us, don't know who we are, never heard of the product. And can we convince them that this is something they want to pay for? Because that was our bar for this being a valuable product. And so we knew we had a lot to learn. You just talked about the messaging. And so what people had to do was, actually in the beginning, there was no, now that I think about it, there was no payment in the beginning. So what people had to do was they could come to our website and they could schedule a call with one of the founders. It was a 30-minute Zoom, and we would talk to them, interview them, and walk them through the sign-up process. So there was no onboarding flow. There was a special link. You could create an account. It just dumped you in the product with no coaching or help or anything. And there was really no flow to speak of. So we were like the manual onboarding flow. We would walk people through the sign-up process, help them connect their apps, explain how it all worked. It was a very high bar because people had to be willing to sit through a half an hour call to get into the product. So that's where we started, and that was helpful because we learned a lot about who are these people, why are they signing up for the product, what do they want, what are they looking for. It helped us validate some of our messaging, and it helped us understand the need there. So we weren't really measuring any active. Also, the scale was very low. So
tens of people weekly.
And that's where we started. We weren't measuring any kind of activation there because we knew every customer by name, and we would talk to them. We had Slack channels with them. So it was very hands-on, very high touch. And as we scaled that up, we got to the point where we were doing maybe, what was the peak, like 50 a week or something?
Yeah, it was a lot.
It was a lot because they're half an hour each.
It was a lot.
That's 25 hours of onboarding.
25 hours. And then we created this Slack Connect channels with everyone and, answered all of their questions. So it was a very, very hands-on process, which was great for us because we were learning a ton.
Exactly. So when we got to that point, we were seeing the kind of the stickiness, and as we talked to people, they were communicating the value of the product for us. And so we knew we were at the point where we had to go wider. We had to not be limited by our own ability to perform these onboarding calls. And also we felt like we were probably bottlenecking the funnel by only enabling people who were willing to sit through a 30-minute onboarding call, try the product. So that's when we decided to go self-serve, which is the typical thing that people would think of. You go to the website, you click the sign up button, you input some information, and you have an account, and then it kind of ushers you through a set of steps to get that account set up. So we launched that in September.
That's right. And actually useful to, if we're thinking about the timeline of last year, it was like winter, kind of we were building and validating. In the spring, we started doing the onboarding. And then in June, we had a big sort of funding announcement moment that that's when we got to the sort of 50 a week. And then we set a goal for the team to do a product hunt launch by early fall, basically. And so part of the thing that we wanted to test in that product hunt launch was whether we could do the self-serve. And I think, let me ask you this, because I think this is super interesting. When we were doing the concierge onboarding, which is we call the white glove or whatever you want to call it, what was the like aha moment, or what was the moment where people understood and were excited to try the product?
So we would do this thing where we would get people signed up and set up, and we would do it in a meeting. We had a special link for them to sign up that would essentially it's kind of in the weeds of how the product works, but it would essentially add them as an attendee to that meeting, so they would get tasks from that meeting. And then we would do this thing in the meeting where we would say, so if I were to say something like, hey, Stella, can you please respond within the next week and tell me what you think of the product? Hoop should collect that. And then Hoop doesn't work in real time. It's always kind of processing minutes. So we say like, Hoop doesn't work in real time, but as I keep talking, that should pop in. And then like a couple minutes later, that task would be like, pop on the screen. And people are like, wow, like that was the thing you said. And then we could kind of talk about that. That really made it click for people that you just talk in meetings. You don't have to click any buttons or trigger the thing in any way. It's just going to find these tasks for you. Sometimes people would be funny. They'd be like, hold on, let me test this. And they would give you a fake task and it would get that too. So that was always it, where they would get that.
I think the thing that was interesting is that people didn't really believe that it
Yeah.
was going to work. And
Yeah.
I think maybe it's because, we're sort of new into this age of AI.
Totally.
But people really didn't believe. And the funny task that we ended up saying over and over again, which I think it made its way into our onboarding right now,
Yeah,
is
it did.
the, hey, Justin, can you get your helicopter pilot's license
Yeah.
by the end of the day or
Yeah.
something like that?
I think that was a Brian contribution.
Yeah, Brian made that up, but it was just so random and funny. And then I think having done so many of the onboardings, what was really cool is that in that moment, people would, because they were screen sharing with their product or with their account, and so you would see that they had the basically empty to-do list,
Yeah.
and you would see that task pop up there. You would see the person see it, and they would be like,
Yeah.
like there was that aha moment.
Yeah, and then we could extrapolate that. So like, oh, if you've connected Slack, like same thing. You just talk normally in Slack and the tasks are just going to pop in. So
Yeah.
that definitely made it click for people. I think the other reason people were kind of suspicious was, I'm sure we've all seen, especially early, but even still, AI products that seem really cool on the surface. Like, oh my God, look, it's just going to make this blog post for me. And then you try to use it in a real world situation. You're like, oh, this is actually garbage. Like
Yeah.
the quality of the output is very low and not even close to human. So the fact that Hoop could actually pretty reliably and accurately find these tasks and create the to-dos, put them on your list, was eye-opening to people.
So I think what's really interesting too is that we knew from this concierge onboarding experience that this was the magical moment. Seeing
Yeah.
something that is specific to you or a specific interaction pop up in a to-do list without you
Yeah.
clicking on anything. So as we started building the self-serve experience, I think from the beginning we wanted to figure out how we could recreate that moment, that magical aha moment, but without us humans there.
Right, exactly. And that way you could onboard hundreds or thousands of people a day, not, max out at 50.
Exactly. All right. So now we're in the summer. We're building the initial self-serve experience.
Yep.
What was that like?
Yeah, so we built it pretty quickly, and we used our experience building products in the past and drawing from past experiences, building and tuning onboarding flows to try to come up with something that made sense and was intuitive and easy to use. Onboarding is a bit of an art, so we knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but it took you through the normal things. Hey, here's what the product is, here's the value, connect your accounts, here's what happens, all that sort of stuff, so that we could get people signed up and into the product. And we had set this product hunt date, as you mentioned earlier, so we were rushing to get this all done by product hunt and test it and make sure it was going to work. It was basically like a couple days before product hunt. It was up. We had a couple days of our kind of typical traffic running through it, and we're like, okay, it's working. Like, people are creating accounts, and no, it doesn't seem like there's any bugs or anything. At least too early to tell like how that's going because we have a 7-day free trial. But at least they're creating the accounts and they're in and they're connecting their different apps. And then it was on to product hunt, and we launched, and we got a pretty good amount of traffic, and a lot of that was for a while there. Our highest number of trials for a given week was due to product hunt.
And so coming out of product hunt, we had tested this activation flow.
Yeah.
What were the results? Like, were we happy with it?
What's funny is we actually didn't have the actual we didn't have our current metric then. So it's not like we knew right away what activation was, because we didn't have that specific measure of activation. We did do things like we have this concept of potential based on the kind of sources people connect. Are they a high potential user or a lower potential user, in the sense of likelihood to get value from the product? So we were looking at that. We're of course looking at like number of trials and all that kind of stuff.
But it was bad.
But yeah, we didn't see any engagement. And I think that's due to two sources. I think that's one, because our onboarding flow didn't do enough to demonstrate the value quickly enough. It got you all the basic connections set up, but it didn't give you the aha moment right away. So that was a big part of it. I think the other part was a little bit of the characteristics of the product hunt traffic. You're going to get a lot of people who are early adopters. They like new products. They want to try something. but they don't necessarily have the acute pain point or really need the solution. They just think it sounds cool and looks cool and they want to sign up and try it.
So we go through the product hunt. The activation isn't great.
Right.
I remember we had an offsite and we had said that our number one priority and goal was to increase activation.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the moment where we came up with this concrete
Yeah.
metric.
Yeah, exactly. So we had to say, all right, how are we going to actually measure activation? And how are we going to come up with a definition that we feel like correlates to likelihood to subscribe? We did not have a lot of subscribers at the time. We had added in payment, but we had a low number of subscribers. So it was a little tricky to look at the data because you're talking small numbers here. So it's hard to draw really definitive conclusions. I was looking back, like I said, I was looking back through those Figma decks that I had created. We explored a bunch of different ideas. I think we were inspired by the stories probably everybody's heard around, I think it was Facebook, right? Where they had, was it 7 friends in 10 days or 10 friends in 7 days, whatever, some kind of threshold that you would cross where your likelihood to be an active user was significantly greater once you crossed that threshold. So we were looking for something like that. I explored a whole bunch of different things. I was looking at number of tasks people were assigned, number of sources they connected, number of tasks they completed, numbers of meetings they used Hoop in, all this kind of stuff. And there's a little bit of an art to it. Like you can segment the data and you can say, oh, people who use, 80% of the people who use Hoop in 20 meetings in a week subscribe. And you're like, oh, well, only like 10 people have done it and 8 of them subscribe. So that's pretty good, but it's also like a tiny number. And also way more subscribers came from the other side that didn't have 20 meetings. So there's the balance of the percentage of people that cross that threshold that go on to subscribe versus the percentage of subscribers that have crossed that threshold. And you're trying to find this sweet spot of a metric where crossing that threshold increases your likelihood to subscribe. Most subscribers have crossed that threshold. So there's sort of like kind of two directions you have to look at it from. And so for a lot of them, we could come up with metrics where it's like, oh, everybody who crosses this or a high percentage of people who cross this threshold subscribe. But then when we look at the overall subscriber base, not very many of them have crossed that threshold. So it's not like a requirement to subscribe. And so that wouldn't have been useful as an activation metric.
So there were 3 specific things that we did that had a very big impact. Do you want to talk about them?
In terms of the actual like flow and changes there?
Yes.
So we settled, long story short, we looked at a bunch of metrics. We came up with this. We settled on the definition we already talked about. People who receive or are assigned tasks from 2 or more sources in their first 8 hours. The first 8 hours was an important piece of that because we wanted to make sure people were seeing the value very quickly because they had this moment where they signed up and were probably excited or optimistic about the promise of the product. As you get days away from that sign-up moment, you have diminishing enthusiasm.
We made them, there's some stuff you have to do. You have to connect your Slack, you have to connect your calendar.
The other thing, just to say one more thing before I get into what we actually did, but why we picked this metric is we wanted to pick a metric that we felt like correlated is not the right word, but was connected to the value that Hoop is supposed to provide. And so Hoop connects to your workplace tools and creates a centralized task list across all those tools. Assigning tasks is key, and tasks across sources is key. That felt like it was very closely related to the core value that the product should provide. We had a lot of clarity on that core value because we had done so many concierge onboardings as follow-up calls, that those had all given us the context and the understanding of the market to have real confidence in the value that people wanted. So we came up with this metric. Now, of course, the goal, do we want to talk actual numbers?
I don't know.
Magnitude? We could talk
I
actual.
think magnitude is fine.
So we came up with this number, and when we measured it for the product hunt cohort, it was like low single-digit activation, like pretty poor. Again, that was partially due to our flow, which was pretty basic, but also due to the audience. It improved a little bit just as the audience became majority people who were looking for this solution, not just early adopters trying new products. So that was a little bit of a bump there, but still we're in the single digits here. We're not high. So that made us sit down and say, all right, if we want to get more people into this situation, what can we do? There's a whole bunch of things. Some people don't connect Slack. Maybe they're worried about connecting Slack. Maybe they don't have permission to connect Slack. Maybe they don't understand the value in connecting Slack. There's a whole bunch of things we could do there to get people who aren't connecting Slack to connect Slack. Some people are connecting Slack, but they're not getting, and they're connecting their calendar, but they're not getting tasks within the first 8 hours. Why not? Well, maybe they don't have a meeting in the first 8 hours. Maybe they don't, they're signing up at night and Slack's not active. It naturally is like you start to explore those opportunities. It creates a whole bunch of ideas of things you could try to do to improve the activation. So we did a few things here. The first very quick win that we did was whenever somebody chose to skip a connection or disconnect one of the connections, we asked them why. And that helped us understand why people were doing it. And then we could kind of update the copy and the UI there to try to instill more confidence in people and get them to connect it. We also, in certain cases, we send emails that help people understand that and that kind of stuff. So that was one thing that we did to help get more people to connect more sources so they could potentially get more tasks from those sources. The next thing we started to say was like, for some of these sources, like Slack, there could have been recent tasks. And maybe if we could surface a recent task from there right in the onboarding, we did a thing where when somebody connects Slack, Hoop starts looking back at some of the channels to try to find a couple. I think we do a max of 3, if I remember, tasks from recent history that we can put in the list. So right as soon as, like, before they've even left the onboarding flow, they can be like, oh my God, there's real tasks in here. And hopefully have that moment of like, wow, like, yes, I do need
my tasks.
That is a thing from that we talked about, like, holy cow, it's in here already. So we added that in. And we also added in kind of tandem to updating the onboarding flow to be more focused on very immediate value. We added a video experience. It's a video of me, which is kind of embarrassing, but it's a video of me talking, and it's supposed to simulate a Zoom call. And I say the helicopter pilots thing, and that's supposed to capture a task from there. So again, trying to recreate that aha moment from the concierge onboardings, but in sort of like pre-recorded video form.
And you hated that idea.
I was worried that people wouldn't understand it because I thought maybe they would think like Hoop is a video tool when it's not and whatever. But I think the implementation we eventually came up to was good. I was also worried it would be boring, but we got the video down to pretty short. It's like 40 seconds now, I think.
It's not skippable. And, we had a lot of very healthy internal dialogue about how that video would be adding friction. But then it turned out that video was actually, and I think what's so cool about that video is it's literally taking the aha moment that we figured out from the concierge onboarding and doing it in the flow, because Justin says the helicopter pilot license task, and then he kind of points up and he's pointing at the to-do list and it pops up in real time. So we actually, even after we did that video, we did some onboardings where we watched people go through, and you could see people were annoyed when the video came up. In a similar way that people started out the concierge onboarding sometimes a little annoyed that they had to be on a call with you because they have better things to do. And by the end of that 40-second video, they were like, okay, I understand. Like, I say a thing and it pops up in the list. So I think what's super cool is that we were able to translate that very like bespoke, high-touch moment that we created in the concierge, but we were able to do it in the self-serve flow.
Yeah. And you have to imagine, I don't know if we would have come up with that idea hadn't we not done all those concierge onboarding. So that was going through that and kind of doing the thing that didn't scale ended up being super valuable.
So the combination of what we call the look back of the tasks, the understanding why people disconnected, and then doing the video, those things had a huge effect on activation. And then there was one more big thing. And
then the biggest thing, so of course we say 2 tasks from 2+ sources. So then the question is like, well, what if there were more sources?
Exactly.
Right. And the beauty of Slack, what we realized doing the Slack look back is like, oh, well, there's historical data in there. We can't, like, we tried to sort of simulate a meeting with the video. Slack, we can look at the historical data. We're like, hey, what if there was another source with more historical data? We had already implemented kind of a beta version of email capture, and it required people to forward emails in to Hoop, which was cool, but not really the full Hoop experience, right? The full Hoop experience should be passive. The AI is just out there and it just finds stuff for you. You don't have to do anything. So we finally implemented the full email experience. So now you connect to your Google inbox. Hoop is smart about processing the messages. It has some filters where it excludes things like cold outreach and market emails and notifications and other things you probably don't want tasks from. And it pulls in tasks from there. And the cool thing about that was then we did the same look back strategy with email. And so now when people connect Slack, people connect email, there's likely that they're going to get at least 1, if not, I think the max we give them is 4 tasks from recent memory there, which within 5 minutes of signing up, forget 8 hours, within 5 minutes of signing up, hopefully they have this aha moment of like, oh my gosh, there's tasks from like real tasks relevant to me, actually from my Slack and email, and they're here. And now I understand how Hoop's going to work, and I'm beginning to have trust that it's going to, on an ongoing basis, get these tasks and centralize them into this list for me. So having implemented all that, I think you were going to ask, like, how did this perform? Is that where you're going with this?
Well, no, I was just going to say, this is like, it's really interesting. We started this call saying, we basically 10x'd our activation rate. And everything that we're talking about was a very iterative process. And also, we were like learning as we went along. Mm-hmm. So and the time frame is over like 9 months or so.
Yeah.
So I feel like, maybe one of the takeaways is for other founders who are trying to impact a metric. Well, number one, having a really good definition of what the effect that you're trying to have, but also just understanding that it's not an overnight thing.
Yeah.
Usually that it's going to take a lot of like trying things out, seeing what happens to the data, etc.
I would consider like the first, 5 months, where you can consider it like the concierge era. Mm-hmm. Activation was actually very high back then. That's because we were on the call with people, coaching them through it, and there's all the social pressure of like, we're telling you what to do, and we're screen sharing, and also we're like a normal person and not like a scary hacker. So activation was quite high then. When we switched to self-serve, it plummeted because all of those factors went away. And so getting it back was kind of like, well, how do we recreate all the trust and clarity and sort of magic of the concierge, but without us there? And we wouldn't have been able to do that without all that experience. We did hundreds of concierge onboard. I don't know how many hundreds we did, hundreds of them. It was a lot of learning. It was a lot of work, but that really paid off. And the cool thing is, once, Product Hunt was September, I would say we tripled the rate from Product Hunt within 3 months.
Yeah.
And that led to a significant increase. It wasn't a tripling, I said tripled. We 10x'd. We 10x'd in 3 months. Mm-hmm. Conversion went up a bunch too. It didn't 10x, but it also went up in tandem with activation going up. So all those learnings that we had from those hundreds of concierge onboardings, then taking the team and putting our heads together on how do we recreate that, really focusing on the core value, having a way to measure it so we could know if we were getting better, doubling down on the things that worked, like the look back experience. All of that came together to like really make a hugely meaningful difference. And we're also, when we had set that metric, we set a goal for where we wanted to get to, and we basically 2x'd our goal, and we thought we were stretching with the goal. So it really made a big difference.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. I think this is another one of those examples of the Paul Grahamism of do things that don't scale. Totally. I think this is a great example of why you should not do something because you're afraid that it's not going to scale.
I think in this particular case, and probably in a lot of cases, if you try to scale something before you really understand it, you're probably going to waste a lot of time and go in the wrong direction, and a lot of effort's going to be wasted. So at times it was painful doing those concierge onboardings because it was a lot of time and effort for us for small number returns. And there was weeks when I did like 20 personally. It was a lot. But we were banking all this knowledge and all this understanding of the customer and the market, and that paid huge dividends and let us go way faster. Once we decided to scale it, we were able to do so really effectively, and I think that was really the key.